It seems most people can agree on one thing. Joffrey Baratheon was a little psycho shit. I say most because even George has mentioned how shocked he's been to receive letters from people talking about how much they love, feel sorry for, and or are attracted to Joffrey. So, there's always those people. However, is Joffrey actually a psychopath? And if he is, was he born one or made one? So it's clear to us to see Joffrey has some issues.
Kill him! Kill all of them, I command it!
He's cruel, really sadistic at best, temperamental, power drunk, and just all around not a great guy.
Everyone is mine to torment.
But is it fair to say this kid is a certified psychopath? And if he is one, was it even his fault? First off, I want to point out that declaring someone is a psychopath as a child is often incredibly difficult. Children and teenagers start off with a shortage of empathy. The most popular theory why that is because of how our brains develop, which is a back-to-front pattern. Our latest research shows that the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully form until a person is in their mid-20s. The prefrontal cortex plays a role in personality, complex planning, impulse control, control and organization of emotional reactions, coordinating and adjusting complex behavior. Basically, the part of the brain that deals with good judgment, awareness of long-term consequences, and has a hand in empathy. Now, just because this part of the brain doesn't fully develop until our 20s doesn't mean those younger don't have a functional prefrontal cortex. They certainly do, but because it isn't fully formed, they lack the complex decision-making and planning skills that adults have. And unfortunately, teens also process information with their amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain. Ever see a teenager have an overwhelmingly emotional reaction that just seems absolutely batshit insane? But it's attributed to how their brains are developed and what parts of their brain aren't fully developed yet. I mean, even when trying to peg someone as a psychopath, it isn't just difficult with young people. Even in adults, psychopathy can be hard to spot. Those with this disorder can appear normal and sometimes even charming. What you don't see is their lack of conscience and empathy, and their volatile and manipulative behavior. Even then, people try to label others as a psychopath way too often simply because they might act a bit ruthless. It is guessed that psychopathy is relatively rare, and that 1 out of every 100 people are afflicted with it. However, even with them being a psycho, most will never harm or kill because it doesn't suit them. So they're usually not that dangerous. So knowing kids can act in a bold, cruel, and scary ways, lacking empathy, but then their brains develop more completely and they become well-adjusted adults, for the most part. Is it fair to say Joffrey is a psycho given his age in the books and when he dies? If you ask George, no. It isn't fair. George seems to view Joffrey as simply a teenage bully, saying in an interview, "You know, I think Joffrey is a classic 13-year-old bully. Do you know many 13-year-old kids you'd like to give absolute power to? There's a cruelty in children, especially children of a certain age, that you see in junior high and middle school. We don't want 13-year-old bullies to be put to death. We probably do when we're the 13-year-old victims, but they grow up and most of them grow out of it, and sometimes people do regret their actions. But Joffrey will never get that chance, so we don't know what he would have become. Probably nothing good, but still." So it appears George felt that this was something Joffrey could grow out of, which means he isn't a psychopath. You don't grow out of being one. There is no cure. Not even age. Unfortunately for our little King Joffrey, and I guess George, despite his age and the difficulties in diagnosing a psychopath, psychologists still feel pretty confident in diagnosing him as one. Joffrey doesn't just exhibit cruel teenage behavior. He has premeditation to his cruelty and proactive aggression. He believes and uses violence for what he personally desires. Humiliating, hurting, or getting someone to agree to what he wants. Psychologists view proactive aggression as the deepest form of psychopathy, where cruelty and violence are not just the product of being impulsive or reckless, but come from a deeper evil within and just plain meanness. Proactive aggression allows a person to enjoy murder, torture, pain, humiliation, something Joffrey definitely enjoys.
Look at him!
We also know psychopaths are not very empathetic and are too focused on themselves and their pleasure. This usually results in them physically dominating people and being quick to anger. They don't have a very good impulse control, which results in them making decisions without enough information to make a good decision.
Treason shall never go unpunished. Sir Ilyn, bring me his head.
Psychopaths will also use people regardless of harm to them to get what they want, because in their eyes, they aren't people. Screaming, throwing things, and getting rid of people on a whim is also very likely if they become upset. And while people may fear the psychopath, they don't respect him.
The king is tired.
But you may be on Team Joffrey and be thinking, Roris, you're being too hard on the kid. If you're still on the fence about Joffrey being a psychopath, this next part may interest you. We typically diagnose this spectrum disorder by using the 20-item Hare psychopathy checklist. A score of 30 or more is the bar set for clinical psychopathy. Psychologists took Joffrey's behavior and used the checklist to find his score. He was found to have at least a score of 30 and rank in the 86th percentile for contemporary teen boys who are currently on probation for breaking the law. If you're still not convinced Joffrey is a psychopath though, we can look at Christopher Patrick's proposed 3 components of psychopathy, linked both to nature and to nurture, and we see Joffrey matches them really well. The first one is boldness. High confidence and low fear with a lot of tolerance of danger. This is likely linked to differences in the amygdala and other neurological systems related to fear. Joffrey certainly shows a high level of confidence and low fear. He's been willing multiple times to lead men to deal with issues where a smarter man or king may hang back. He also is confident in his decisions, despite others knowing and fearing what he's done.
Attacked by a mob there. We had a full complement of guards. It didn't stop them. The king barely escaped with his life.
My mother's always had a penchant for drama. Facts become less and less important to her as she grows older. Our lives were never truly in danger.
Number 2. Disinhibition. This is categorized by low behavioral constraints and high need for immediate gratification. Joffrey was willing to cut a pregnant cat open because he wanted to see the kittens now, and didn't have the behavioral constraints to warn him it wasn't a good idea. This one is linked to problems in areas of the frontal lobe that control foresight, self-control, and planning. We can also lump other decisions by Joffrey in this category. Finally, number 3, meanness, which includes low empathy and low positive attachments and high cruelty and exploitiveness. The meanness is often due to one of the other 2 components coupled with a negative early environment. Joffrey has low empathy for others.
War means nothing to me. Oh, I can't stand the wailing of women.
And is incredibly cruel and exploitive.
My mother tells me a king should never strike his lady. Sir Meryn.
And as for the negative environment, let's be honest, the kid grew up with a whoring drunk father who gave little fucks about him, a narcissistic mother, and a family that was a lot dysfunctional, especially if we're just looking at who he thought was his parents.
17 years later, holding it all together. Don't you get tired?
Every day.
How long can hate hold a thing together?
Well, 17 years is quite a long time.
So I think we can agree Joffrey has plenty of moments that combine all 3. Ned's beheading, cutting out the tongue of a singer, murdering a woman with a crossbow, planning on drowning a man in a cask of wine for a minor upset, he's striking home runs on all those categories. So let's agree at this point in the video that Joffrey is a psychopath. Now the question is, was Joffrey born a psychopath or made into one? Since we know that psychopaths are both born and made, there could be an argument for either one. A very typical finding when studying psychopaths is negative early life experiences, a differently wired brain, or both is found. So was Joffrey doomed from day one because of a differently wired brain that maybe wasn't helped with incest? Or was he made through a neglectful, sometimes abusive father, and a narcissistic mother that probably gave him zero boundaries? Let's talk about the possibility of being born a psychopath first, and why that may have happened. If Joffrey has neuropsychological deficits, it could explain his villainy. Some suggest that problems in the brain's ventromedial cortex may be the culprit. If Joffrey had issues with this part of his brain, he'd have the inability to determine whether an experience was good or bad. This would lead him to repeating negative behavior and to not avoid it. For example, Joffrey hits Tommen. While he may get in trouble and a normal child might avoid doing that to avoid punishment, Joffrey would not care about the punishment and would be more likely to keep hitting Tommen when it serves his purposes, or if it brings him pleasure or amusement, which would create a positive environment that strengthens the behavior and leads to it happening more in the future. Another thought is the amygdala, a tiny area in the temporal lobes of the brain, which may be key in understanding the psychopathic brain. This part of the brain processes emotion rapidly, and when it doesn't recognize fear, which it may not in the brain of a psychopath, the individual loses the ability to get lit up physiologically and stop behavior that is normally considered hurtful, careless, or reckless. And really, there are many other theories on how the brain being wired differently may lead to a psychopath being born. Maybe the incest, being a child of two siblings, has messed with his genetics and caused his brain to develop differently than most and cause him to act with low inhibition and high boldness. While this is very likely, I doubt George will ever give us a look at Joffrey's brain or give us a 100% answer that yes, his brain developed differently due to genetics. So now let's look at if Joffrey was made a psychopath. The psychologists I've talked to seem to all agree that Joffrey's upbringing was a breeding ground for a psychopath. Spoiled by his mother and others, and his every whim indulged, but despised by his father. Well, who he thinks is his father. We all remember the cat incident. Joffrey. I remember once this kitchen cat. The cooks were wont to feed her scraps and fish heads. One told the boy that she had kittens in her belly, thinking he might want one. Joffrey opened the poor thing with a dagger to see if it were true. When he found the kittens, he brought them to show his father. Robert hit the boy so hard I thought he'd killed him. Robert hits a small boy so hard, he knocks out 2 of his baby teeth. That is incredibly brutal.
I should have spent more time with you. Shown you how to be a man. I was never meant to be a father.
And yes, hurting animals is a sign of a future serial killer and psychopath, but we can't 100% say that was what this was. Imagine the people Joffrey grew up around. Robert, Cersei, Tyrion, Jaime, Renly, Stannis, Tywin. The boy may have been curious, and he probably didn't learn any empathy towards animals or small folk from them. I know people always want to jump to the cat thing and serial killers to prove his guilt, but it just isn't enough. Now all the other terrible shit he's done combined with that probably is. Anyway, so an uncaring, whoring, drunk father who had a terrible relationship with his paranoid, bitter, narcissistic mother, mixed with being spoiled due to being royalty, is a perfect storm to create a psychopath. As one psychologist explained on Joffrey, the key ingredients for a psychopathic stew: overindulgence mixed with parental rejection sprinkled with harsh and abusive treatment of an already neurologically weird child. Layer onto that Joffrey felt violence would be a way to get his father's love, and he was doomed to become a violent, aggressive person. Not only that, but we have other hints that Joffrey grew up in a very negative environment. Tyrion is seen as being incredibly brutal to Joffrey on many occasions. Sure, he could have started acting that way to Joffrey as he became more of an asshole, but Tyrion may have been abusive towards him his entire life. We have Joffrey's uncle, really father, who ignores him, which may have also helped him feel neglected and not worthy of his family's love. It is also clear from how others talk about Joffrey, there was never much love for him. But again, it's hard to say if it was always that way, or as he acted in more displeasurable ways, this negative environment grew. Lastly, there's always those who wonder how Tommen and Myrcella turned out much better than Joffrey. This could be explained by Robert being more abusive towards him, Joffrey being spoiled more and paid attention to more by Cersei, or the fact that Joffrey was born with some issues in his brain that his siblings didn't have. So he was already a neurologically off kid, and his environment pushed him to how he is, where his siblings, who perhaps didn't get as shafted genetically, didn't have those factors. It is an interesting question to ponder though. Could this negative environment and a narcissist for a mother and a distant, abusive father have tipped Joffrey into being a psycho? Or do you think Joffrey was simply born one? Again, maybe from messed up genetics due to incest that maybe didn't mess up his siblings as well, but could have messed them up in different ways? Or do you think he was both born with abnormalities and his upbringing made them worse, leading to his behavior?
It must be so exciting to squeeze your finger here and watch something die over there.
Let me know your diagnosis for our sweet prince down below in the comment section. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and come back for more videos.